And joining me today is my special guest, Leigh Dundas, author of Just Stand Up and champion of so many children and women around the world, really. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Allison. It's an honor to be on the show.
Tell me a little bit about your work in general, and then we'll jump into the book.
I started this life with a very normal trajectory. I was just a normal lawyer here in Southern California. I did large firm litigation work. I represented Fortune 500 companies in courtroom battles. I started the work a bit earlier than the average attorney. I went to college at 14 and got into law school at 17. But other than that, it was a very normal, corporate, boring sort of life. And then I had a kid and, helped my husband with his business. But around about 2013, we started doing some traveling. We took my 8-year-old daughter at the time out of school, traveled for about 4 to 6 months in Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. And that's when I got into doing the anti-sex slavery work. I was picked up as general counsel by a sex slavery nonprofit that was doing a lot of work in Europe at the time. And I suddenly found myself doing things like living in Thailand part-time, hiring former Navy SEAL, former SWAT guys to be undercover intelligence assets that we would put in the brothels as fake pedophile buyers to sort of do intel analyses on the brothels, see how many kids were being sold, what were the ages, what languages did they speak, where were they from, and then working with governments to do busts of those brothels and get the Johns who were frequenting them and the pimps who were running them busted and serving time. So I was starting to do that in fall of 2013 and still doing that when the pandemic hit 3 years ago.
So the issue of human trafficking has definitely been brought to the forefront lately, especially with the film Sound of Freedom. Then there's been some backlash where people are saying, well, some of this is QAnon or conspiracy theories. Could you just describe in general, how bad is it? We're hearing numbers of 2 million children around the world. Just give us the facts.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. It's not a QAnon conspiracy theorist. And as with anything, when you're trying to get attention on it, the bad guys are going to try to spin it in any way they can to discredit it. But human trafficking predated Sound of Freedom, predated the 2020 issues, predated Donald Trump's, run through office there. So when I started doing the work in 2013, it was a very large problem. And currently now, 2023, it is $150 billion a year industry with a B. $150 billion a year industry, and the bad guys are making all that money tax-free. These are criminals. They're not paying taxes on that and giving half to the government like all of us honest, hardworking folk do with our money. Currently, the current best estimate from all the triple letter agencies in our country and the counterparts in foreign countries is we're looking at 40 million people are currently enslaved between labor trafficking and sex trafficking worldwide. To give you a frame of reference, that is pretty much like everybody in California waking up, being chained to a bed or forced onto a shrimping boat or into a mine in Africa, working 24/7 until they die. The average life expectancy of a girl who is turned out here in America, according to the FBI, from the time she is first turned out, which is on average at age 12, is 7 years. So if you do some simple math, you add 7 years to the age of 12, you realize these kids are dead or dying by the time they can legally vote here in America. And in Asia, in Africa, where I work, the situation is even worse because the kids are being sex trafficked at age 2, age 5, age 7. And
how does that happen at age 2 or 5?
Well, it's a very good question, and one that I struggled with when I first started doing the work. In Asia, the parents of these kids are the ones in many cases who are selling them to the brothels. So this is not like the movie Taken, where they're being kidnapped into the sex trade, or even like in Europe where we've done a lot of work and you talk to the girls after you rescue them and they're 17 and they go, well, I thought I was going to be a waitress. A recruiter came to my town. I lived in Ukraine, or I'm a poor gypsy. My ancestry is Roma, Hungarian gypsies. They go into these poor areas and they say, you're going to be a waitress and we're going to take you to a Greece hotel and you're going to be a high-end waitress or a bartender or a maid and you can send money home to the family. And they go, great. But en route, they're drugged, their passport paperwork's taken, and they wake up chained to a bed in a brothel, being raped 10 times a night in a breaking house until they are sufficiently apathetic to be trusted to be put in with a John and not try to make a break for escape. But in Asia, it's different. right? The parents are selling their kids to a brothel. And we took a film crew in back in fall of 2013 because we wanted to make that clear. And I'll never forget, we were interviewing a 12-year-old girl in the brothel. She comes in her peach chiffon party dress and takes a seat in the corner where we had the light shadowing her face appropriately. And we asked her, did you know when you got here what you would be doing? And she said, I knew exactly what I would be doing, but I'm not unhappy. And my colleague from London leans over and he goes, Leigh, you got to ask the question again. Nobody is happy to be in a brothel. There must have been something wrong with the translation. So we ask it a second time. And for the second time in as many minutes, she looks straight into the camera and she goes, I knew what I would be doing. I'm not unhappy because my 7 brothers and sisters have food on the table and they're not starving to death. And I remember looking at her, looking at my Christian film crew who had hands that were now shaking on the camera and tears running down their faces. And I thought, holy cow, if you had asked me an hour ago, do I think it's wrong to sell my eldest daughter to a brothel? I and you, Allison, and all of your viewers who are listening to this would have been like, is this even a question? Of course it's like, we would have had only one answer. But here's the real question. Is it any more or less wrong to not sell your eldest daughter to a brothel so that all 7 or 10 of your kids can starve to death this year? Is that a better end to that equation? And the question as to how you get to the point that you're so poor that you're selling your daughter to a brothel in order to not have her starve to death and not have you starve to death is communism. All of the countries we're working, 90% of the girls that I am rescuing out of the brothels in Thailand and even those in Cambodia are coming for the communist country of Laos. Communism makes you so poor that you have nothing left to eat, and your choice is watching your child starve or selling them so they don't. So to solve the brothel problem, to solve the sex slavery problem, which is a huge problem right now. It is set to take, currently it is the second largest criminal economy in the world. It is set to take over drugs for the top spot inside of the next few years because there's more profit in selling a 7-year-old to a sex buyer than there is in selling cocaine to an addict. And every small-time gangbanger to big-time mafia has figured out, oh, it's a 95% profit margin to do that. Because if you're a pedophile and you come back to me tomorrow night, I don't need to go buy more coke to sell you more coke in the intervening time and cut out 30% of my gross from last night's proceeds to go resupply my lines. I just rent you to the same girl until she dies. I have no hard costs except the cup of rice or the Happy Meal in America that it keeps, takes to keep her alive. So all of the money these sex traffickers make is profit minus a buck or two for food a day. 99% profit margin. That is why we are having an explosion of trafficking. That and this. Because, hello, you can order up a girl online as easily as you can order a Domino's pizza, whether you're in Cambodia or in Chicago right now. But to solve the world's poverty problem is going to definitionally then solve sex slavery. And the other half of that equation is you need to teach your boys not to buy people. There is no demand. There is no trade. As ugly as it is to say it, the Holocaust was not solely the result of Hitler. It was the result of a bunch of Germans who did not stand up and say, no, you're a crazy man. We're not going to bake our neighbors in ovens. And in the same manner as that occurred, the same is true here. You can demonize these parents. You can demonize the sex traffickers all you want. If nobody were buying 7-year-olds for sex or 17-year-olds for sex, they would be selling cocaine again instead of people.
And is the United States the largest buyer of this market, of pornography, of trafficking?
It is definitely up there with just because we have so many people and we have such access to technology now. I don't know what the current stats are. It's definitely region dependent. And technology has definitely made it easy to exploit. So now you've got American traffickers and American Johns and pedophiles who are basically raping people online by having 7-year-olds in rooms do sex acts with their teddy bears or their toys in the Philippines, in, Cambodia, in wherever it may be. But I will tell you, in the town that I work in the south of Thailand, that's on the Malaysia border, there's 140 child brothels. American men aren't going there to buy. It is Japanese sex tourists, it is Asian sex tourists who are going to that town. So it is also region dependent. But I also know one of the girls I worked with was she'd been trafficked into a sex slave trading camp on the Thailand-Burmese border, which is now Myanmar. And when she woke up, she was kidnapped off a bus bench. A group of guys jumped out of a truck bed, pushed a needle into her arm, knocked her out with a narcotic. And when she woke up, she was in this sex slave trading camp. And when I asked her, what is that? She basically described something that sounded like what you would see in Gone with the Wind, like, from the 1800s, where the plantation owners would go to market on Sunday and they'd see the bazaar and they'd see a bunch of strapping Black people and they'd be like, well, I'll take that guy from my fields and that woman to clean my house. And so these buyers, and what she even said is these buyers would come in from all over, from Switzerland, America, Australia, Japan, and the Asian countries, right there to this sex slave trading camp. And they would line up these girls who were 0 to age 12 or 13, because they don't really want sex slaves much beyond the preteen era. And these guys would go down the line and be like, yep, I'll take that one and that one and that one and that one. And then they would take them home to their brothels.
It's really hard to conceive. Has anyone been able to get inside those camps and with undercover video document what's happening?
We did not document that camp, but we took a Christian film crew, as I briefly alluded to in my last section, into the town that had 140 child brothels in it. And if you look behind me, I blurred her face, but that is one of the girls. That is one of the girls that was caught in those brothels in the town I work in. The buyers, the sex buyers, like young-looking girls. They want children, but they don't like the Laotian nose. So ironically, there's a weird thing that goes on in this town, which is the Laotian sex slaves on their way from Laos to the deep south of Thailand. They'll take them through a city and get them a nose job and a breast augmentation, because they want boobs to play with and they want the nose to look different, but they still want children. So they'll give them the adult woman breast on a child-sized body. And when we were talking, the pastor and I were talking to this girl, I didn't know what was going on. It was the first month I was doing work in there. And the brothel, the pastor had sort of talked to the mama-san, and we were sitting at a table buying endless rounds of beers for the girl and 7-Up and water for us for hours. I mean, this went on like all night long. And finally she got up to go to the bathroom, and the pastor leaned over to me and he said, if you look closely when she comes back, her eye socket is all bruised. It's not eyeshadow. It's slight, blue purple bruising. Because, and he explained that she had just had a nose job and her nose was still fully packed with gauze. So she comes back from the bathroom and she actually leans up her nose, shows me the string that's hanging out. It looks like dental floss, and cracks a joke to him. I mean, they're going back and forth in Thai. I don't understand. At that point, I didn't understand Thai. And she goes, basically, she's like joking and saying, do you think I should pull the string? And I'm like, oh, gosh, no. But, it was such a crazy night, because I looked at this pastor and I thought, very few Christians I know would understand why this Finnish Australian pastor is sitting in a Thai brothel paying the mama-san money. But the reason for that is he had struck a deal with the mama-san that so long as we were buying her drinks, she didn't have to work. Have you ever tried to service a John when your nose is fully packed with gauze? Think about that for a second. You could die. So doing Christian work in these brothel towns looks a lot different than you would ever probably considered before now. But it is crazy the things that go on in these places, in these areas. There is no lower age limit. There is no menu of things that are off limits. The parents sell these girls for maybe $300 US. That's a year's worth of food in Laos. And the girls are just fodder. And the mama-sans that I used to demonize, like the parents in the equation, which now my heart breaks for them, those are just the girls who didn't die. They never grew up wanting to. Nobody wants to work in a brothel or be a mama-san when they grow up. These are girls who did not die by John, by pimp, or by AIDS. And now they're 22. They're washed up. Nobody wants the 22-year-old. They want the 12-year-old or the 2-year-old. And so they are basically left babysitting the girls in the brothel. But make no mistake, they wanted no piece of this either. They still want to go home. But where's home when your home is the one who sold you?
So what is your goal at this point? Because it seems, besides saying, okay, communism is bad and, theoretically that is what needs to be tackled in order to get to this issue. What are the tangible goals that you're trying to achieve?
Well, to solve slavery, you need to solve the poverty problem and you need to solve the demand problem. The demand problem is solved very easily. You educate parents and children themselves that you don't buy people for sex, and that you pay fair wages for work. And bingo, you no longer have little Black children in African mines giving us metals that we use in Teslas and our cell phones, and chocolate and Nikes and t-shirts, and working for free or for 1 penny a day, right? And fair wages. You teach people that you don't treat people like this. People who know more do better. I am a firm believer that more than 80% of this planet are good people. I think a lot of the time when you see what you think are bad people doing bad things, it's actually people who are solving a problem the only way they know how. And the options they had were very different than the options you had. You've never been so poor that you had to think about whether you're going to sell your child or starve to death. But if you had been, you might have made a different decision than you could have ever conceived of living in Chicago or LA, right? So you educate people in the first instance, and they do better, and you give them tools. One of the first days I was walking through this brothel town, the girls, they wake up at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and there's some downtime before they're on the clock working, and they were making little handicrafts. I was like, what are you making? And they're like, a purse out of stuff we pulled out of the river. They were like recycling refuse floating down the river and making beautiful purses out of it, like stuff I would have paid to buy in Target or Macy's or Nordie's. And I was like, where are you selling this stuff? And they laugh. They're like, there's no market. Nobody has money down here except for the buyers, and they don't want to buy a purse. They're here to rape us. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to add to my to-do list when I get back to America, finding a buyer for Macy's, because if we can systematize these products that they're making that are gorgeous. I mean, they're recycling, like it's a 3-for-1 win, right? They're recycling stuff that would otherwise be polluting the planet. They're making beautiful handicrafts that could find a market. If we could get that sold, instead of paying, Calvin Klein and Ralph Lauren to buy clothes, we could be funneling this money back. One purse, I did the math on it. I went so far as to do the math. One purse sold for 25 or 30 bucks at a Macy's one time a month feeds that woman's family for like a month or 3 or something in Laos. So giving, and they've done, Branson and some of the other folks have gone into these regions, and they've given the woman who's starving and about to have to sell her children, right? They give her a sewing machine, and they give her a micro loan. It's a $20 sewing machine, and you need to pay us back over the next 3 years. Something like 99% of these women make good on the loan. They never default. You give the man the money, he smokes his opium and he goes and blows it on girls and gambling and drugs. He never makes good on the loans, and 90% of the time. But literally, it's an inverse ratio. The woman is good for it 9 out of 10 times. The man is not good for it 9 out of 10 times. And suddenly, you have solved the poverty problem. You have solved the driver for why these families are selling their children. And bingo, you no longer have a sex trafficking problem. When I was getting into this work 10 years ago, I read a Red Book article, and it was some famous feminist, I forget if it was Naomi Wolf or one of those, Gloria, and they had gone into Africa with a very first world mindset, much like I did heading into Asia 10 years ago, thinking they were going to solve the sex trafficking problem. And they interviewed these Black ladies who were selling their kids, and they're like, why are you doing it? And they're like, well, because the elephants come every couple of years and knock down our fences and trample our crops, and then we're starving, and we have to sell a family member or starve to death. I mean, same setup as in Asia, right? And the final sentence in that Red Book or Good Housekeeping article was, never, ever did I imagine when I went to Africa to tackle the sex slavery problem, did I think the answer was going to be electric fences to keep the elephants out of the fields? Who would have thunk that was the answer to solving sex slavery in that region? So keep an open mind. You don't know what you don't know until you go in and find out what the drivers are in any given region. What works in Africa is slightly different probably than what works in Asia. But again, you have to figure out what the drivers are and solve the problem. And in many cases, it's very simple. Get them a sewing machine. Get them a fence that can't be trampled by an elephant, and bingo, you're not selling children for sex anymore. And then here in America, you stiffen penalties. For 10 years, I've sat on a congressional committee that was created by Congressman Ed Royce, who at the time in 2013 was the head of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, designed to stiffen penalties on sex buyers and sex traffickers. Sweden, who has a 51% female leadership, legislature, made the buying and selling of sex by anybody, not just children, but even adult prostitution, the equivalent of a US felony where people would go away for 7 years. Guess what European country has the tiniest incidence of any type of trafficking now? Sweden. Because all the traffickers are like, hell no, I don't want to get caught in Sweden. We'll go to Amsterdam to do what we do, right? Stiffen the penalties. When they interview pedophiles that get caught in San Francisco, there's a famous lady who's a PhD, and all she does is she studies sex buyers. And they interview these guys who are dentists and they're architects and they're your husband. They're my husband. They're normal guys, right? I'm not saying literally, but figuratively, they could be anybody. And they say, why do you do this? And they say, because I can, because I don't have to go to the wrong side of town. I can order it up to my hotel or to my house when my wife's on a conference. I can have the girl come to me. It's easy. I don't have to risk getting arrested in a bad side of town now with the cell phone. And there's no consequences. If I get caught, it's a slap on the wrist, or I go to John's school. It's like going to traffic school. It's a slap on the wrist. And they say, well, would a name and shame work? And they go, oh, yeah, even if I had to do one night in jail, even if I didn't end up with a permanent record, I'd never do it. You know, St. Petersburg, Florida, instituted a name and shame. They did sex trafficking stings like the ones you see on Dateline, and they took the guy's name and photo and they broadcast it on billboards all over St. Pete's. His name, his photo, what he got busted for, and they paired that with a Dear John letter to the wife that said, Dear Mrs. John, you probably don't know this, but on Saturday night on the wrong side of the tracks in St. Petersburg, your husband was arrested for soliciting an underage prostitute, probably not his first time. So accordingly, you might want to take yourself to the nearest health department and get tested for AIDS, syphilis, and gonorrhea to make sure you're not going to die. Sincerely, your local health officer. You know how quickly that dropped the incidence of sex trafficking in St. Petersburg, Florida? Overnight, it dropped it to 25% almost.
That's amazing. Now, who did that in St. Petersburg, and where are they now, and why don't they implement it in other cities?
Well, they have been. Now, a lot of cities, they're waiting until the conviction happens, so they don't do it right after arrest. But like Orange County, in my area, Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force, they publicize the names of convicted sex offenders. They put their names on the website. I don't know if they're doing the billboards. They should be. I don't think they are. But it makes the news. They run them on the local news, and word gets around. I mean, we have a vertical prosecution unit, meaning we have dedicated cops and DAs who do nothing other than sex trafficking busts in Orange County. They don't even work rape cases or child abuse. It's not allied crimes. It is only sex trafficking. And they've just had a model, hamster wheel performance on this, and they've taken the show on the road to teach other jurisdictions to do what works. And it works great. And it's much of what I've been doing to leverage by hook or by crook these blue state counties and governors and mayors back open. We didn't like what our health officer did when she masked us. I was not per se against masking. If you think it's good for you, go ahead and mask. But if your mask works, the rest of the world shouldn't have to do it. We don't all need to wear condoms tonight just because you're having sex, right? So it should have been an individual choice. This is America. This isn't communist China where the government dictates what you wear on your face or your body. I looked at our health officer and I'm like, who is this woman? I've never heard of her. She was installed a month before this thing rolled out. It was all very suspicious. I stuck some PIs on her. And I said, I want to know everything there is to know about this woman. Well, to come to find out, she had no background in public health. She had spent the first 8 years after graduating from med school working for her mother's methadone clinic in Utah, where she was handing out Suboxone prescriptions to heroin addicts. So you know what I did? I went to the board meeting and I made that known. And it was getting live broadcasted on Channel 3 into every home in Orange County. And then we made a poster of it. And we went and sat that poster in front of her house. And we called out and we named her and we shamed her. And we made a TV ad when they were going to do vaccine passports. And it ran every hour on Fox, CNN, and MSNBC. And guess what? Those name and shame programs worked. Orange County, time and again, using that technology, fought down unconstitutional mandates without ever having need of going to court or going to our state capitol and trying to get a legislative move underway. Name and shame works. Do it more. Do it whenever you see any injustice.
Well, Leigh, now I understand why the book is called Just Stand Up. Yeah. It's really the message for everyone in your own way. Figure out how you can stand up and make your voice heard.
Absolutely. Yeah. Standing up is what gets it done. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, when you think about the tactics that worked to shift society and to higher, more humane planes of existence, the essential nugget is they held their space. They communicated what they were doing and they sat. They sat and they hunger fasted peacefully. They sat at the counter. They sat in the front of the bus. They sat, they walked into schools, little Black children, and they did not give up ground. And they made the authorities look like the inhumane, fascist, communist, whatever, totalitarian a-holes that they were. And they came at them with dogs and fire hoses and overabundant police response and dragged these people, bleeding on the knees. And if it bleeds, it leads. And all of a sudden, you had all of America seeing little Black children in Alabama fighting down water hoses and, having German shepherds stuck on them. And that started to shift the perception in America of what should be allowed and what should not be allowed. But they never did it going toe to toe with guns and weapons. They did it by standing up to tyranny. It's the message that still works. We just need to do it.
Well, Leigh, it's been an absolute honor speaking with you today. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story and your wonderful book, Just Stand Up.
Yes. And I encourage your people to buy it this week. Just Stand Up. You can find it on leighdundas.com or my nonprofit website, which is freedomfighternation.org. They both have pop-ups and little links that you can click. And we use that money to fight for the children who can't fight for themselves, to forward civil liberties, individual freedoms the world over, not just in Asia, not just in America, but wherever we find injustice. So I will put your dollars to good use. And the messages that I have learned the hard way by fighting tyranny, I'm hoping you can learn the easy way by just reading about it and deploying to good ends in your own spheres and universes.
Well,
Thanks
thank
again
you.
for having me.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise. Take care.